You just set a boundary. You protected your energy. You did the healthy thing. So why does it feel like you're the bad guy? You set one boundary with someone who's been draining your energy for months. Suddenly, you're selfish. You're cold. You've changed. You're the villain in their story. If you're an INFJ nodding along right now, trust me, this isn't your moral failure. This is actually your strategic win. By the end of this video, you'll understand why being cast as the villain is not only inevitable, but necessary for your psychological evolution. Let's dive into why this shift from people pleaser to perceived villain is the most rational thing you can do as an INFJ. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The psychology behind the villain label. Here's what actually happens when INFJs start setting boundaries. Your natural empathy creates incredibly unbalanced relationship dynamics, in which you're constantly giving emotional labor without receiving it in return. You become the person everyone comes to for understanding, validation, and emotional regulation. But here's where it gets interesting. When you consistently provide this level of emotional support, people don't just appreciate it, they value it. They start expecting it. Your empathy becomes their emotional crutch. They begin to organize their entire emotional world around your availability and understanding. This is what I call the empathy trap. Your ability to see and understand others' pain becomes their justification for unlimited access to your energy. They're not consciously manipulative. They genuinely believe you want to help because you've been so good at it for so long. Now, when you finally withdraw that emotional labor, when you say no or set a boundary, their entire emotional support system crumbles. And instead of recognizing their dependency, they project their discomfort onto you. You become selfish for not continuing to sacrifice yourself. You become cold when you protect your energy. This projection mechanism is actually a psychological defense. It's easier for them to label you as the villain than to examine their own emotional dependency. Because if they acknowledge that they've been relying on you to regulate their feelings, they'd have to face their own emotional immaturity. But here's what makes INFJs particularly vulnerable to this dynamic. Our cognitive function stack makes us susceptible to guilt manipulation. We lead with introverted intuition, which sees patterns and possibilities, but our auxiliary function is extroverted feeling. This means we're naturally attuned to how others feel about us and how our actions affect the emotional atmosphere around us. When someone we care about starts painting us as selfish or uncaring, our extroverted feeling picks up on their distress. We can literally feel their disappointment and anger. And because we value harmony and hate conflict, we start questioning ourselves. Did I really do something wrong? Am I being too harsh? I could go back to how things were. This is precisely where the trap snaps shut. The moment you start trying to prove you're not the villain, you've already lost. You're back in the dynamic where their emotional state determines your worth. You're seeking their approval to validate your own moral compass. Every time you explain your boundaries, justify your needs, or try to make them understand why you had to protect yourself, you're reinforcing the very dynamic that made you the villain in the first place. You're teaching them that your boundaries are negotiable and that their emotional reaction can override your self-advocacy. The truth is, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will never validate your decision to create them. They can't, because validating your boundaries means acknowledging that they were taking advantage of your empathy, even if unconsciously. It means admitting they've been emotionally dependent on someone who is slowly burning out from giving too much. So they create a narrative where you're the problem, where your self-protection is selfishness, where your growth is betrayal. And if you're not prepared for this psychological inevitability, you'll find yourself trapped in an endless cycle of trying to prove your goodness to people who have a vested interest in believing you're bad. The strategic value of accepting the villain role. So what happens when you stop fighting the villain label and actually embrace it? Everything changes. Because here's what being the villain really means in this context. It means you're someone who prioritizes your own needs and boundaries over other people's comfort. It means you're willing to disappoint others to protect yourself. It means you refuse to sacrifice your well-being for someone else's emotional convenience. When you accept this label, you break the guilt manipulation cycle completely. You're no longer seeking their approval or trying to manage their emotional reaction to your boundaries. You're not explaining yourself or justifying your decisions. You simply accept that in their story, you're the bad guy, and you're completely okay with that. This acceptance creates profound psychological freedom. You're no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of people-pleasing, only to feel resentful when your efforts aren't appreciated. You're not constantly monitoring other people's emotional temperature to make sure they're comfortable with your choices. You stop being reactive and start being proactive about your own life. But here's what's really interesting about villain energy. It actually attracts healthier relationships. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone and stop accommodating people who drain your energy, you create space for people who actually value you as a complete person, not just as an emotional resource. Your boundaries don't threaten people who are secure in themselves. They don't need you to be constantly available to validate their worth. They respect your self-advocacy because they practice it themselves. These are the people who see your transformation from people-pleaser to self-protector and think, finally, you're standing up for yourself. The power shift is dramatic. Instead of constantly reacting to other people's needs and emotions, you become proactive about creating the life you actually want. You start making decisions based on what serves your growth and well-being, not what keeps other people comfortable. You stop managing other people's feelings and start managing your own energy. This is where your empathy becomes strategic instead of depleting. When you're not constantly giving it away to people who take it for granted, you can use it more intentionally. You can choose when and how to offer emotional support. You can invest in relationships that are reciprocal instead of one-sided. And here's something crucial. This villain phase isn't permanent. It's a necessary psychological evolution. You're not becoming a cold, uncaring person. You're becoming a person who cares strategically. You're learning to distinguish between people who deserve your empathy and people who exploit it. The people who truly matter in your life will adjust to your new boundaries. They might be surprised at first, but they'll respect your growth. The people who can't change, who keep trying to guilt trip you back into your old patterns, are showing you exactly why the boundaries were necessary in the first place. This acceptance is essential for your long-term mental health. INFJs who never learn to embrace their inner villain often end up burned out, resentful, and disconnected from their own needs. They become martyrs in their own lives, constantly sacrificing themselves for people who don't even notice. But when you accept the villain role, you model something powerful for others. You show them what it looks like to value yourself. You demonstrate that it's possible to be empathetic without being a doormat. You teach people how to treat you by refusing to accept treatment that doesn't meet your standards. Practical implementation: how to win as the villain. So how do you actually embrace this villain role without becoming genuinely harmful? First, you need to develop internal validation systems that don't depend on other people's approval. Your moral compass has to come from within, not from external feedback about whether you're being good enough. When someone tries to guilt trip you, your response is simple acceptance. They say you're being selfish. You say, maybe I am, and that's okay. They say you've changed. You say, yes, I have, and I like who I'm becoming. You're not arguing with their perception. You're not trying to change their mind. You're simply refusing to let their opinion dictate your self-worth. This requires a fundamental shift in how you think about morality. Being good doesn't mean being available to everyone all the time. Being kind doesn't mean sacrificing your well-being for other people's comfort. Being empathetic doesn't mean absorbing everyone else's emotions and problems. The timeline for this transformation varies, but expect it to take several months to feel natural. At first, you'll feel guilty every time you say no or set a boundary. That guilt is your old programming trying to pull you back into people-pleasing patterns. Acknowledge the guilt, but don't let it change your behavior. Remember, this shift ultimately serves others too. When you model healthy boundaries, you allow others to set their own. When you stop enabling emotional dependency, you force people to develop their own emotional regulation skills. When you refuse to be someone's emotional crutch, you create space for them to find their own strength. You're not becoming the villain. You're becoming the hero of your own story. And sometimes, being the hero of your own story means accepting that you'll be the villain in someone else's. Being the villain in someone's story often means being the hero in your own. This psychological evolution from people pleaser to self-protector isn't just inevitable for secure INFJs, it's necessary. If you want more strategies for building unshakable boundaries, check out this video where I break down the complete INFJ boundary setting system. Subscribe if this helped you see your villain era in a new light. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.